How to read a Magic the Gathering card. It is a common adage among Magic the Gathering players that reading the card explains the card. While this is true, many of the words and symbols on a Magic the Gathering card require prior knowledge of Magic the Gathering game mechanics that are not explicitly printed on it. You can't really say you've read a Magic the Gathering card without learning to play Magic the Gathering, and you can't really say you know how to play Magic the Gathering without learning to read Magic the Gathering cards. A source of much discussion back in fall 2019 was Questing Beast, a card included in the standard set Throne of Eldraine. A brief aside, in Magic the Gathering, there are a number of different ways to play, each with different rules which we call formats. Standard is a constructed, rotating format that includes up to 2 years' worth of sets. Each year, there are typically 4 or 5 sets of cards added to Standard, and then, with the release of the Fall Standard set, any sets that are more than a year old stop being legal for play in Standard. Alchemy, mentioned in the graphic I've borrowed here, is another rotating format, but it is exclusive to Magic the Gathering Arena, which is a free-to-play digital platform for playing Magic the Gathering. Cards that leave Standard are sometimes reprinted back into Standard in later sets. Lightning Strike was previously printed into Standard with Core Set 2019, which rotated out of Standard in October 2019. It was then made Standard legal again as of September 9th, 2022, with the release of Dominaria United. Worth mentioning, Wizards of the Coast seems to go back and forth on whether there will be a core set or not in a given year. We didn't get one in 2022. Also, core set names are a bit like car model years in that they would be standard legal at the start of the year in their name, not named for the year they were released. In addition to 4 or so standard sets, a number of other supplemental sets or other card products are released each year that are not added to the sets of cards available to the standard format. Like I was saying, there was quite a bit of discussion when Questing Beast showed up in Standard because it was thought, by some, to be too complicated and possibly too powerful for the Standard format. Standard is considered by many to be the premier format that introduces new players to Magic the Gathering. I believe if we read it together, you'll see that it's not so complex if you understand how it works in practice. As to its power, well, the title of the series is How to Read a Magic the Gathering card. Let's start with what you'll recognize from episode 1. This card is named Questing Beast. Its type line indicates it is legendary, which means the legend rule applies, and you can only have one card named Questing Beast on the battlefield under your control at any time. If you end up with more, you choose all but one to send to their owner's graveyards. Questing Beast's card type is creature. We'll get back to that later. Questing Beast's creature type is, fittingly, beast. A creature type is a bit like a land type, but doesn't really have any meaning on its own. There are a number of cases where another game effect will care about a creature type. It's important to note that creature is a card type, while beast is a creature type. Only creature cards and tribal cards can have a creature type. In the top right of the card, you will see the casting cost. This is how much mana you will need to pay to cast the spell this card represents. We can read this as 2 generic and 2 green mana. We must have a total of 4 mana available to cast this permanent spell, and 2 of it must be green mana. As there is a total of 4 mana in this card's casting cost, the mana value of this card is 4. The term generic mana is worth digging into. Generic mana costs can be paid with mana of any color or colorless mana. Worth repeating before we move on, almost all rules come with a caveat unless an in-game effect changes this. This is a key feature of Magic the Gathering why it is important to understand how every card may be changing the rules. For example, Gigantha, the Wellspring, stipulates that the mana that it produces cannot be used to pay generic mana costs, while Chromatic Orrery allows you to spend mana as though it were mana of any color. Chromatic Orrery also happens to produce colorless mana, which will come in handy if you end up having to pay a mana cost that explicitly requires colorless mana. Because the only color in this card's mana cost is green, and there are no additional indicators that it has additional colors, this card is green. Because the only color anywhere on this card is the green mana symbol, this card's color identity is also green. This card's set symbol and the ELD in the footer indicate this printing is, as mentioned earlier, from the set Throne of Eldraine. The set symbol is orange, and there is an M in the footer, which tells us this is a mythic rare card. As previously mentioned, Question Beast is a creature card. Creature is one of the permanent types, which means that when it enters the battlefield, it becomes a creature with the qualities of the card. In fact, in earlier printings, the place that is now the type line would explicitly state, summon whatever, because when you played the card, you would be casting a spell that summons a creature. Because this card has a casting cost, we can try to cast its spell if we are able to pay that casting cost. Paying all of the costs required to cast the spell allows us to put the card with that spell from our hand onto the stack. If the spell resolves, the card enters the battlefield as a creature, with all of the qualities of the card. Worth noting, when a card is in our hand, library, graveyard, or in exile, it is treated as a card. But when it is on the stack, it is considered a spell, and when it is on the battlefield, it is considered a permanent. In the bottom right-hand corner of a creature card are the power, before the slash, and the toughness, after the slash. We can say this more simply by saying the power and the toughness in the order in which they are printed on the creature card. Questing Beast is a 4/4. The power of a creature is how much damage it tries to deal when attacking. The toughness is how much damage can be marked on it before it is destroyed. If a questing beast were to attack and be blocked by a Keeper of Fables in the combat phase, the questing beast would assign its 4 power as damage onto the Keeper of Fables' 5 toughness, leaving the Keeper of Fables with 1 toughness remaining. At the same time, the Keeper of Fables would mark its 4 power as damage onto the questing beast's toughness, leaving it with 0 toughness remaining. As Questing Beast has 0 unmarked toughness remaining, it will be destroyed at the end of the combat damage step. Unfortunately for Keeper of Fables, even though it still has unmarked toughness, it will still be destroyed because Questing Beast has Death Touch. But we'll get to that later in the presentation. Damage can also be marked directly to a creature by the effect of a spell or ability. If any combination of damage exceeding the total toughness of a creature is marked onto it, that creature is destroyed. All damage that has been marked onto a creature is removed at the end of the turn. This means that the damage marked onto a creature in a single turn needs to exceed its toughness for that creature to be destroyed. It doesn't accumulate between turns, but rather resets to 0 at the end of the end step. Additionally, if a creature's toughness is ever 0 for any reason, it is destroyed. For example, if an opponent's spell were to modify Questing Beast's toughness such that it was 0, it would be destroyed. Permanents also have a text box that may have ability text that defines how this permanent is different from other permanents of the same types. Questing Beast has quite a few different abilities. Keyword abilities are words that have game-defined effects that aren't explicitly printed on the card. This is a little bit like how you can play one land card from your hand on each turn, or like how forest cards can be tapped to produce green mana. The 3 keyword abilities on Questing Beast are Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste. These 3 keywords require both an understanding of the game mechanics they are modifying, as well as an understanding of how they do so. Let's start with Vigilance. Attacking doesn't cause creatures with Vigilance to tap. This is notable because attacking usually causes a creature to be tapped. A tapped creature cannot block and cannot activate any abilities that would require it to tap itself. Next, let's look at Death Touch. Any positive amount of damage dealt to a creature by a Sorth with Death Touch is enough to destroy that creature. Worth noting, we are using the term source because it is possible for a non-creature permanent or even a non-permanent spell or effect to have Death Touch. Also worth noting, the attacking player assigns damage to blocking creatures, so if multiple creatures block a creature with Death Touch, the attacking player may choose to assign damage to multiple blocking targets, 1 damage at a time, up to the attacking creature's power. Finally, we have Haste. Creatures with Haste are not affected by Summoning Sickness. Summoning Sickness is a commonly accepted shorthand for a special rule for creatures that says that they cannot tap themselves, untap themselves, or attack unless they have been under their controller's control continuously since that player's most recent turn began. Haste allows creatures to tap themselves, untap themselves, or attack immediately after they come under a player's control on the battlefield. If a permanent becomes a creature on the same turn it enters the battlefield, it is affected by Summoning Sickness. Even though you could normally tap a forest that entered the battlefield this turn for green mana, if it is turned into a creature, you won't be able to do so until your next turn, unless it has haste. Also worth noting, if control of a creature changes between players, that creature won't be able to attack or activate its abilities that require tapping or untapping itself unless it has haste. Because of these restrictions, many spells that allow you to temporarily take control of another player's permanent, or turn a non-creature permanent into a creature, will also give the permanent haste. Of note, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste are considered evergreen keywords, meaning they are likely to show up on cards in any set. There are other keywords, like Prowess or Cycling, which show up regularly, but not in every set, and are considered deciduous. There are also a number of set mechanic keywords that will only be used in a set that is focusing on that mechanic. A good example is the keyword Surveil, which shows up as a keyword in some sets focusing on the plane of Ravnica, because it is associated with one of that plane's factions. The same effect will appear on cards in other sets without the associated keyword. You'll also notice that Nightveil Sprite has reminder text for how the Surveil X ability works. Cards that have space for reminder text will often include it for set mechanic or deciduous keyword abilities on cards that feature them. These examples also have flavor text. The reminder text and flavor text on cards will always be in italics. Any italic text on a card does not have a direct mechanical impact on the game. These remaining abilities are what people are usually referring to when they say reading the card explains the card. Let's break them down one at a time. Questing Beast can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. We've already discussed power and blocking, so this should make a little sense already. Essentially, the combat phase of each player's turn is broken down into a number of steps. After a player declares their attacks by choosing which of their creatures are attacking, and which targets those creatures are attacking, valid targets are opponents or planeswalkers controlled by opponents, any opponent being attacked or having one of their planeswalkers attacked can block the attacking creatures with untapped creatures they control. What this ability does is prevent opponents from choosing creatures with power 2 or less to block Questing Beast with. Combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. When a creature is blocked, it marks combat damage on the creature or creatures blocking it up to the total of the attacking creature's power. When a creature isn't blocked, it deals combat damage to whatever it was attacking. If attacking a player, this is that player's life total. And if attacking a planeswalker, this is that planeswalker's loyalty. There are a number of effects in Magic the Gathering that prevent damage by one means or another. When combat damage is prevented, the damage isn't marked on or dealt to the target. This always on or static ability says that, so long as this permanent is on the battlefield under your control, damage dealt by creatures you control cannot be prevented. If you control this creature, it negates effects that try to prevent combat damage in this way. When you are reading a card that uses the term you, it is talking about the person who controls the card or spell at the time that the effect is being resolved. If an opponent were to take control of Questing Beast from you, this would mean that the effect is now affecting their creatures and not yours. Whenever Questing Beast deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls. This last ability is a triggered ability. This is something that will happen whenever a specific in-game event occurs. In this case, the effect triggers when Questing Beast deals damage to an opponent. This is most likely to happen if Questing Beast attacks that player and isn't blocked. When this ability is triggered by Questing Beast dealing some amount of combat damage to an opponent, Questing Beast does that same amount of non-combat damage to a planeswalker that same opponent controls. As mentioned before, damage to a planeswalker is done by removing loyalty counters from that planeswalker. So, if your opponent were to control a planeswalker with 5 remaining loyalty, and you were to attack them with Questing Beast and deal 4 damage to their life total, this ability would trigger and cause 4 loyalty to be removed from that planeswalker, leaving it with 1 remaining loyalty. When a planeswalker's loyalty reaches 0, it is destroyed. When a player's life total reaches 0, they lose the game. The last player in a game of Magic the Gathering that has not lost is the winner. Dealing damage to your opponent's life total until it reaches 0 is the most common way to win a game of Magic the Gathering. In the end, Questing Beast wasn't the most powerful or complex card in Throne of Eldraine, and its effects could be parsed with a basic understanding of the rules of Magic the Gathering, and a little patience. You don't actually need to know everything about every card before you start playing Magic the Gathering. Learning to read cards and play cards kind of goes together and can be done in parallel. If you want to jump in, one place to start is Tolarian Community College on YouTube. The professor has a great How to Play Magic the Gathering MTG Learn to Play in About 15 Minutes video that doesn't focus so much on the minutiae of a single card. My first video in this series was the most watched thing I've ever put online in any context, and despite me recommending that you not subscribe, A number of you did anyways. With all of that positive reinforcement, I found the motivation to make a second video. So if this is the kind of content you are looking for, subscribing to my channel and commenting on, liking, and sharing my videos would encourage me to continue to make more, but no promises. I would really appreciate it if you followed me on Twitter and liked and or replied to my mild hot takes, retweets of ska covers, and fake magic cards. Links should be in the description. Thanks for watching.